Rude people don't arrive loud by accident. They arrive loud because they believe volume creates dominance. Most people think the fastest way to shut down rudeness is to respond faster, sharper, stronger. But that only feeds the very thing they're trying to escape, because rudeness isn't about what's being said. It's about who controls the moment. The moment someone is rude to you, they are testing one thing. Can I pull you out of yourself? If they succeed, they win. If they don't, they shrink. And here's the truth most people miss. You don't shut down rude people by overpowering them. You shut them down by refusing to be moved. Rude people expect emotion. They expect defense. They expect explanation. So when they don't get it, something breaks. Calm is confusing to someone who thrives on chaos. When someone speaks rudely, your nervous system wants to react. That rush in your chest, that tightening in your jaw, that urge to correct, to prove, to fight back. But power lives in the pause. The instant you slow down, you take control of the room. A calm response tells them something without saying it out loud. I'm not threatened by you. And insecurity cannot survive that message. You don't need clever comebacks. You don't need sarcasm. You don't need explanations. Short responses carry weight. A steady voice saying, let's keep this respectful, or I'm not engaging with that tone. Then silence. That silence does more damage than 1,000 arguments, because now they're exposed. They were rude, and you didn't take the bait. Here's something important. Rude people lose power when their behavior becomes visible, not challenged, not attacked. Simply seen. Your calm makes their rudeness look small. Tone matters more than words ever will. You can say very little, but how you say it determines who stands taller afterward. A steady tone says, I decide how this interaction goes. And once that message is sent, most rude people retreat. Not because they understand, but because they feel it. And sometimes the strongest shutdown is no response at all. No reaction, no explanation, no follow-up. Because not every comment deserves oxygen. Silence is not weakness, it's selectivity. When you stop responding to disrespect, you teach people how to treat you without giving a lecture. That's real authority. Remember this, you don't need to win against rude people. You just need to stay intact. The moment you protect your calm, you protect your power. And power doesn't raise its voice. Rudeness is rarely about misunderstanding. It's not a failure to communicate clearly, and it's almost never about the words themselves. Rudeness is a power move. It's a subtle, or sometimes obvious, attempt to control the emotional temperature of the room. When someone is rude, they are not trying to exchange information. They are trying to shift the balance of authority. They want to see if they can provoke a reaction, unsettle your footing, or place themselves one step above you by pulling you one step down. Understanding this changes everything. Because once you stop treating rudeness like a communication problem, you stop responding to it in ways that give it strength. Most people instinctively respond to rudeness by explaining themselves, defending their position, or matching the tone they receive. That instinct makes sense. The nervous system reads rudeness as a threat, and the mind rushes to restore fairness. But explanations don't restore balance when the other person isn't seeking clarity. Defensiveness doesn't earn respect from someone who is testing boundaries, and matching rudeness only confirms that they succeeded in pulling you into their frame. The interaction stops being about the topic and becomes about dominance, with emotions as the currency. Rudeness works because it creates pressure. It speeds things up, it injects urgency and tension into a moment that didn't need either. When someone speaks sharply, interrupts, dismisses, or belittles, they're compressing the space in which you can think clearly. The goal is not to be right, the goal is to make you uncomfortable enough to react. The reaction is the reward. Once you see that, you realize that calm isn't passive in these moments, it's strategic. Power moves rely on predictability. Rude people often know exactly what usually happens next. Someone argues back, someone raises their voice, someone over-explains. Someone apologizes when they didn't do anything wrong. All of these responses signal that the rude behavior worked. Calm, however, disrupts the script. A measured pause, a steady tone, or a brief response forces the other person to face the emptiness of their tactic. Without your emotional energy, their move collapses. This is why tone matters more than content in moments of rudeness. You can say very little and still assert authority if your delivery is grounded. A slow, even response communicates that you are not rushed, not threatened, and not seeking approval. It quietly reclaims control of the interaction. Rudeness thrives on imbalance, calm restores equilibrium without confrontation. It tells the other person that you are choosing how much access they get to your emotional space. It's also important to notice that rudeness often masks insecurity. People who feel secure don't need to diminish others to feel tall. When someone reaches for rudeness, they are often compensating for a lack of influence, respect, or internal stability. That doesn't mean you excuse the behavior, but it does mean you don't personalize it. Seeing rudeness as a power move rather than a personal attack keeps you from internalizing someone else's instability. Short responses are especially effective because they refuse to inflate the moment. Long explanations signal that you are trying to win approval or justify your presence. Brief, clear statements signal self-respect. They draw a line without drama. When paired with silence, they return the responsibility to the other person. Now they must decide whether to escalate alone or adjust their behavior. Either way, you've stopped participating in the power struggle. There's also strength in choosing not to respond at all. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, but in reality, it's a form of discernment. Not every provocation deserves your attention. When you don't engage, you deny the rude person the leverage they were seeking. You show that your focus is not easily hijacked. Silence, when chosen intentionally, communicates boundaries more clearly than arguments ever could. Recognizing rudeness as a power move allows you to stay anchored in yourself. Instead of asking, "How do I explain this better?" you start asking, "What response protects my calm?" That shift changes your posture, your voice, and your presence. You stop trying to manage the other person's emotions and start managing your own. And that's where real control lies. When you respond from this place, rudeness loses its edge. It becomes noise rather than a directive. You're no longer pulled into proving, defending, or reacting. You're choosing how the interaction unfolds moment by moment. Power in this sense isn't about dominance over others. It's about self-command. And once you understand that rudeness is a move for control, you realize the most effective counter is not force, but composure. Disrespect rarely responds to clever words. It doesn't soften because of logic, and it almost never retreats because of explanation. Disrespect looks for reaction, not resolution. That's why emotional control shuts it down faster than anything you could possibly say. The moment you stay steady while someone else is pushing, the dynamic changes. What felt like an attack loses its momentum, because it was never fueled by truth to begin with. It was fueled by your expected reaction. When someone is disrespectful, they are attempting to move you emotionally. They want to see irritation, embarrassment, defensiveness, or anger. Those reactions confirm that they have access to you. Emotional control removes that access. It creates a kind of invisible wall. The other person may still speak, but they're no longer directing the interaction. They're talking into space, and most people can feel that immediately. Words can escalate disrespect because they keep the exchange alive. Each sentence adds more oxygen. Emotional control, on the other hand, starves the situation. A calm face, a steady breath, and a measured response or no response at all send a clear signal. This behavior isn't landing where you hoped it would. That signal is often more disarming than confrontation because it doesn't give the other person anything to push against. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you maintain emotional control. You stop trying to win the moment and start protecting your position. You're no longer playing defense. You're holding ground. This is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on emotional leverage because leverage only works when there's movement. Stillness makes their effort obvious and ineffective at the same time. Emotional control doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means choosing when and how those feelings are expressed. You can acknowledge internally that something was inappropriate without broadcasting it in a way that gives the other person power. That choice keeps your dignity intact. It communicates self-respect without a single lecture. People sense that. Even if they don't consciously understand why the interaction feels different, they feel the shift. Many people fear that staying calm will make them look weak or passive. In reality, the opposite is true. Calm in the face of disrespect signals confidence. It suggests that you are not dependent on the other person's approval, and that you don't need to assert yourself loudly to be taken seriously. Confidence doesn't rush. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't chase validation. Emotional control carries those qualities naturally. Disrespect also loses its force when it isn't mirrored. If someone raises their voice and yours stays even, the contrast becomes uncomfortable for them. If someone uses sarcasm and you respond plainly, the sarcasm falls flat. If someone tries to provoke and you pause before responding, they're left alone with their own behavior. That mirror they expected never appears, and without it, their tactic collapses. Another reason emotional control works so quickly is that it keeps you in your body instead of your head. When emotions spike, thinking narrows. You say things you didn't mean, escalate situations unnecessarily, or regret your response later. Staying regulated keeps you present. It allows you to choose responses that align with who you are, not just what you felt in a split second. That alignment is a form of strength that doesn't need to be announced. It's also worth noticing how emotional control affects the broader environment. Others who witness the interaction often take cues from the calm person, not the loud one. Authority tends to gravitate toward composure. People trust those who can manage themselves under pressure. Even when disrespect continues, it often loses social support when it's met with steady restraint rather than reactive energy. Over time, emotional control reshapes how people treat you. Patterns change. Those who rely on disrespect stop trying because it no longer works. Others adjust their tone without being asked. You don't have to correct everyone. Your consistency does the teaching for you. Boundaries become implicit rather than debated, and respect becomes the default rather than the exception. Ultimately, emotional control is powerful because it keeps the focus where it belongs. Not on the insult, not on the provocation, but on your ability to remain self-directed. When you control your emotional response, you control the interaction. Words may sting for a moment, but they fade quickly. The impression of calm strength lasts much longer, and that's what truly shuts down disrespect. Calm responses have a way of revealing what loud behavior tries to hide. When someone speaks aggressively, dismissively, or with unnecessary edge, they often believe intensity equals strength. They assume pressure creates authority. But when that intensity meets calm, something unexpected happens. The imbalance becomes visible. The calm person doesn't shrink, doesn't rush, doesn't defend. And in that stillness, the insecurity driving the other person's behavior quietly steps into the light. Insecurity depends on movement. It needs reaction resistance or submission to feel real. When someone is calm in the face of provocation, there's nothing to push against. The rude comment hangs in the air without landing. The sharp tone echoes back to its source. Calm doesn't argue with insecurity, it lets it speak for itself. And once insecurity is seen, it loses much of its power. People who are secure rarely need to dominate conversations. They don't interrupt to feel heard. They don't belittle to feel tall. They don't escalate to feel in control. Insecurity, on the other hand, often announces itself loudly. It rushes, it presses. It tries to win moments instead of building trust. When you respond calmly, you're not just refusing to engage in the tactic, you're exposing the motive behind it. A calm response shifts the frame of the interaction. Instead of two people clashing, there is one person centered and another reaching. That contrast is uncomfortable for the one who initiated the tension. They expected friction, not composure. They expected defense, not steadiness. Calm denies them the confirmation they were seeking. Without that confirmation, their behavior feels excessive, even to themselves. This is why calm responses often make aggressive people backtrack, justify themselves, or soften their tone. Suddenly, they feel the need to explain. The power dynamic flips quietly. The person who is pushing now feels seen, and not in the way they wanted. Calm has a way of holding up a mirror without accusation. It doesn't say, "You're insecure." It simply creates the conditions where that truth becomes obvious. There's also an internal effect worth noticing. When you choose calm, you stay aligned with yourself. You're not borrowing someone else's chaos to make a point. You're not abandoning your values to win a moment. That alignment reads as confidence. And confidence, when genuine, doesn't need to announce itself. It's felt in posture, pacing, and tone. Insecure behavior struggles in the presence of that kind of groundedness. Calm responses also remove the illusion of urgency. Insecurity often feels rushed, as if something must be decided or asserted right now. Calm slows time down. It introduces space. In that space, exaggerated emotions lose their justification. What felt like a crisis becomes just another interaction. The calm person controls the tempo, and tempo is a form of authority. It's important to understand that calm doesn't mean passive. It's not silence born of fear or avoidance, it's an active choice to remain regulated. That choice takes discipline. It requires awareness of your own triggers and the willingness to pause before responding. But that discipline is exactly what makes insecurity visible. When one person is managing themselves and the other is not, the contrast is undeniable. In many cases, the calm response doesn't even need to be verbal. A steady look, a relaxed posture, or a simple acknowledgement can be enough. The absence of emotional escalation sends a clear message. This behavior isn't controlling the situation. The insecure person may try again, increasing intensity, but each attempt only highlights the gap. Calm remains consistent. Insecurity becomes repetitive. Observers notice this too. People tend to align with the person who appears composed, not the one who appears reactive. Over time, calm responses build quiet credibility. Others begin to trust your judgment and presence because you're not easily shaken. Insecure behavior, meanwhile, loses its audience. Without reinforcement, it often fades or moves elsewhere. Choosing calm doesn't guarantee immediate change in others, but it guarantees something more important: self-command. You're not outsourcing your emotional state to someone else's behavior. You're deciding how much influence they have over you. That decision is deeply unsettling to insecurity, because insecurity thrives on influence without consent. When calm becomes your default, you stop needing to call out insecurity directly. You don't have to label it, diagnose it, or confront it head-on. Calm does the work for you. It reveals the imbalance without creating a battle. It shows that strength doesn't need to prove itself. And in that quiet demonstration, insecurity has nowhere left to hide. Long arguments don't continue because of complexity. They continue because too much is being said. Every extra sentence opens a new door. Every explanation invites a counterpoint. Every defense gives the other person something to grab onto. Short statements, on the other hand, close doors instead of opening them. They limit the space in which conflict can grow. That's why they end long arguments faster than volume, logic, or persuasion ever could. Arguments thrive on momentum. Once people start explaining themselves, correcting details, or responding point by point, the conversation shifts into a loop. Each side reacts to the last sentence instead of addressing the core issue. Short statements disrupt that loop. They remove excess. They force the interaction to slow down. When there's less material to fight with, the fight loses energy. Short statements also signal confidence. People who feel secure don't feel the need to say everything at once. They trust that what matters will land without padding. In contrast, over-explaining often comes from a desire to be understood, accepted, or justified. While understandable, that desire can unintentionally weaken your position. It tells the other person you're invested in convincing them. Short statements communicate something different: that you are clear, grounded, and not dependent on agreement. There's a psychological effect at play as well. When someone is prepared to argue, they expect engagement. They expect rebuttals, defenses, and emotional involvement. A brief response interrupts that expectation. It creates a pause they didn't plan for. In that pause, the emotional charge drops. The argument loses its rhythm. Without rhythm, escalation becomes awkward and harder to sustain. Short statements also keep the focus where it belongs. Instead of getting pulled into side issues or emotional reactions, you stay anchored to your point. A sentence like, "I don't see it that way," or "This isn't productive," doesn't invite debate, it states a boundary. Boundaries don't argue, they define. Once defined, the other person must choose whether to respect them or not. Either way, the responsibility shifts away from you. Another reason short statements are effective is that they reduce misinterpretation. The more you say, the more chances there are for your words to be twisted, taken out of context, or used against you. Brevity minimizes that risk. It keeps your message clean. Clear messages are harder to distort and easier to stand by later. Emotionally charged situations especially benefit from brevity. When emotions are high, people don't process nuance well. Long explanations often go unheard or misunderstood. Short statements cut through the noise. They are easier to remember and harder to ignore. A calm, concise sentence can carry more weight than a passionate speech when tensions are high. Short statements also protect your energy. Arguments can be draining not because of their content, but because of the emotional labor involved. Constantly responding, clarifying, and defending takes a toll. Brevity conserves that energy. It allows you to stay present without becoming depleted. Over time, this changes how people approach you. Those who enjoy arguing stop finding it rewarding because there's nothing to feed on. It's important to note that short statements are not about shutting people down disrespectfully. They're about choosing clarity over chaos. You're not dismissing the other person's humanity. You're declining an unproductive dynamic. That distinction matters. Calm, concise communication can be firm without being hostile. It sets limits without escalating tension. There's also a deeper shift that happens when you rely on short statements. You stop trying to manage the other person's reaction. You say what needs to be said and allow the response to be whatever it is. That relinquishing of control is powerful. It keeps you from being pulled into endless cycles of justification. You're no longer negotiating your boundaries sentence by sentence. Over time, people learn how to interact with you. They realize that long arguments won't happen, not because you can't argue, because you won't. That reputation changes behavior. Conversations become more respectful, or they become shorter. Either outcome is a win. Short statements work because they are intentional. They reflect a decision to value peace over persuasion, clarity over control. When you speak less, you leave less room for conflict to grow. The argument has nowhere to go, and without fuel, it naturally comes to an end. Authority is rarely decided by what is said. It's decided by how it's said. Two people can deliver the exact same words and leave completely different impressions because tone carries meaning before language is even processed. Tone signals confidence or insecurity, calm or tension, control or activity in moments of disagreement or pressure. Tone quietly determines who leads the interaction and who follows it. Tone sets the emotional frame of a conversation. The first steady voice often becomes the reference point. When one person speaks with composure and the other speaks with agitation, listeners instinctively orient toward the calmer presence. It feels safer. It feels more reliable. Authority emerges not from force, but from the ability to regulate the emotional climate of the room. The person who controls that climate usually controls the outcome. A rushed or defensive tone gives power away even if the words are reasonable. Speed can signal anxiety, sharpness can signal insecurity. Overemphasis can sound like overcompensation. None of these qualities inspire trust. A grounded tone, on the other hand, suggests certainty without aggression. It communicates that the speaker is not threatened by disagreement. That lack of threat perception is often read as strength. Tone also reveals intention. People are highly sensitive to it even when they can't articulate why. A calm tone suggests openness, even when setting boundaries. A hostile tone suggests conflict, even when making a valid point. This is why tone can escalate or de-escalate situations faster than content. Before anyone has time to analyze the logic, they've already responded emotionally to how it sounded. In confrontational moments, tone becomes a form of leadership. When emotions rise, most people unconsciously look for cues on how to respond. If one person remains steady, others often mirror that steadiness. If one person escalates, tension spreads. Authority, in this sense, isn't about dominance, it's about influence. The ability to influence the emotional direction of an interaction is a powerful form of control. Tone also determines whether boundaries are respected. The same boundary delivered anxiously can invite pushback, while the same boundary delivered calmly often ends the discussion. Calm doesn't beg for compliance. It assumes it. That assumption changes how the message is received. People are more likely to respect a boundary when it's communicated as a statement rather than a plea. There's also a self-regulating aspect to tone. When you focus on maintaining a steady tone, you often calm your own nervous system in the process. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts become clearer. This internal regulation reinforces external authority. You're not just sounding calm, you're becoming calm. That congruence is felt by others and contributes to credibility. Tone can expose power struggles without engaging in them. When someone raises their voice or sharpens their words, they're often attempting to gain control through intensity. A calm tone refuses that premise. It doesn't compete. It doesn't mirror. It simply stays steady. In doing so, it highlights the imbalance. The person escalating may feel their tactic isn't working and either adjust or reveal their insecurity more clearly. It's important to note that authority through tone isn't about suppressing emotion entirely. It's about choosing expression over reaction. You can be firm without being harsh. You can be direct without being dismissive. You can disagree without sounding threatened. These distinctions live in tone, not vocabulary. Mastering them allows you to hold your ground without creating unnecessary conflict. Over time, consistent tone builds reputation. People begin to associate you with composure under pressure. That association carries weight. Others may think twice before challenging you impulsively, not because you're intimidating, but because you're predictable in the best way. You don't escalate. You don't crumble. You respond with steadiness. That predictability becomes a form of authority in itself. Tune decides authority because it reveals who is in control of themselves. And the person who controls themselves is rarely controlled by others. When you speak from that place, your words don't need to fight for power. The power is already present, carried quietly in the way you speak. Silence is often misunderstood. Many people see it as avoidance, weakness, or an inability to respond. In reality, silence can be one of the clearest boundaries a person can set. It draws a line without explanation. It communicates limits without escalation, and it does so in a way that doesn't invite negotiation. When used intentionally, silence is not the absence of strength, but the presence of self-respect. A boundary is simply a decision about what you will and will not engage with. Silence becomes a boundary when you choose not to respond to behavior that crosses that line. This choice shifts the responsibility back to the other person. Instead of debating whether something was appropriate, you remove yourself from the dynamic altogether. That removal sends a message more powerful than words: this interaction doesn't deserve my energy. Silence works because it denies reinforcement. Many behaviors, especially rude or manipulative ones, persist because they get a response. Any response can feel like success to someone seeking control or attention. Silence interrupts that reward cycle. Without feedback, the behavior often loses momentum. The person is left alone with their actions, which can be uncomfortable in a way arguments never are. There is also clarity in silence. Words can be twisted, misinterpreted, or used against you. Silence cannot. It is unambiguous in its intent when used consistently. It says, I am choosing not to participate. That clarity can feel confronting to others, especially those accustomed to provoking reactions. They may push harder at first, but that escalation often reveals more about them than about you. Silence as a boundary requires internal confidence. It asks you to tolerate discomfort without filling the space. Many people speak to relieve their own unease rather than to communicate something necessary. Choosing silence means you trust yourself enough to let the moment pass without managing it. That trust is felt by others. It reads as composure rather than passivity. It's important to distinguish intentional silence from avoidance. Avoidance is driven by fear. Boundary setting silence is driven by choice. The difference lies in how you feel internally. When silence is a boundary, there is a sense of groundedness, not anxiety. You are not hoping the problem disappears. You are deciding not to engage in a dynamic that doesn't align with your values. Silence also protects your emotional bandwidth. Constantly responding to every comment, criticism, or provocation drains energy that could be better used elsewhere. By choosing silence, you conserve that energy. You prioritize your peace over the need to be understood or validated in every moment. Over time, this shifts how people interact with you. They learn which behaviors get engagement and which don't. In many cases, silence forces clarity. When you stop responding, the other person must decide how to proceed. They can adjust their behavior, escalate on their own, or disengage. None of those outcomes require further action from you. You've already set the boundary. The next move belongs to them. Silence can also create space for reflection. Without immediate reaction, emotions have time to settle. What might have turned into a heated exchange becomes a moment of pause. That pause can change the trajectory of an interaction. Sometimes, the absence of words allows insight to emerge where arguments would only entrench positions. Choosing silence doesn't mean you never speak. It means you are selective about when your voice is used. Your words gain weight because they are not constant. When you do choose to speak, it's clear that it matters. Silence, in this way, enhances communication rather than diminishing it. Ultimately, silence as a boundary is an act of self-command. You are deciding what enters your mental and emotional space. You are recognizing that not every interaction deserves your participation. In a world that often rewards noise, silence becomes a statement of values. It marks the line between what you will carry and what you will leave behind. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It operates quietly, consistently, and without apology. When all arguments are exhausted, when explanations fail, and when words lose their effectiveness, self-respect remains. It is the final word because it determines what you will tolerate, what you will walk away from, and how you will carry yourself regardless of how others behave. Most conflicts continue because people are trying to be understood, validated, or agreed with. Those desires are human, but they can trap you in cycles that erode your dignity. Self-respect breaks those cycles. It shifts the question from, how do I get them, to change, to what am I willing to accept? That shift ends debates that logic never could. You stop negotiating your worth sentence by sentence. Self-respect shows up in decisions, not declarations. It's present when you don't chase conversations that demean you. It's present when you don't over-explain boundaries that should be obvious. It's present when you remain calm under pressure because you trust yourself enough not to react impulsively. These choices communicate more than any argument ever could. When self-respect leads, you no longer need the last word in a conversation. You already have it internally. That internal certainty is stabilizing. It keeps you from being pulled into emotional tug-of-wars. Others may raise their voices, repeat themselves, or attempt to provoke. Self-respect doesn't rise to meet that energy. It holds its position. And in doing so, it quietly ends the exchange. Self-respect also clarifies relationships. People learn quickly how to treat someone who respects themselves. Not because of threats or ultimatums, but because of consistency. When disrespect is met with calm disengagement rather than debate, patterns either change or dissolve. In both cases, self-respect is preserved. You don't need to convince anyone of your value, you live it. There is strength in knowing when to leave a conversation unfinished. Not every situation needs closure, and not every person deserves continued access. Self-respect recognizes this without bitterness. It doesn't seek revenge or validation. It simply chooses alignment over appeasement. That choice often feels uncomfortable in the moment, but it creates long-term stability. Self-respect also protects your inner voice. How you allow others to speak to you becomes how you speak to yourself over time. When you consistently tolerate disrespect, it seeps inward. When you consistently honor your boundaries, your inner dialogue strengthens. You become more grounded, more confident, and less reactive. That internal shift changes how you show up everywhere else. It's important to understand that self-respect is not rigidity. It doesn't mean you never listen, adapt, or apologize. It means you do those things from a place of choice rather than fear. You can be open without being self-abandoning. You can be kind without being permissive. Self-respect balances empathy with self-command. In moments of confrontation, self-respect often looks like restraint. It looks like choosing silence over escalation. It looks like speaking less, not more. It looks like walking away without proving a point. These actions may be misunderstood by those who equate noise with power, but they are deeply stabilizing to the person practicing them. Ultimately, self-respect ends the conversation because it removes the need for one. You no longer require agreement to feel settled. You no longer need to win to feel whole. Your behavior aligns with your values, and that alignment speaks for itself. When self-respect is present, nothing else needs to be added.